All right, today we're going to talk about something that's absolutely critical for any business leader: penetration testing. You've probably heard it called pen testing. Let's just dive right in.
So let's start with the big question, because it sounds a little nuts, right? Why on earth would you actually pay good money for someone to try and break into your own systems? It seems counterintuitive, but that question is exactly why this process is so important. Well, the answer is pretty simple. You do it to find your weaknesses before the bad guys do. A pen test is basically a controlled, simulated cyber attack. You're hiring ethical hackers to think and act like real attackers to see how far they can get. It's not just some technical checkbox. It's a core part of managing your business risk. It answers that nagging question, what could a real hacker actually do to us? Now, to really get this, let's follow a story. We're going to use a fictional company called Innovatech Dynamics. Picture them as a growing tech company, maybe a lot like yours. They're getting ready to launch a big new product, and they handle sensitive customer information. They're asking all the right questions about security. And this is what's keeping their IT manager up at night. They know that a data breach, especially right at launch, could be devastating. It could totally destroy customer trust and tank the company's reputation. So for them, this isn't about compliance. It's about understanding their real-world risk.
So, how does a pen test even start? You might be picturing a hacker in a dark room typing furiously, but nope. It starts with a conversation. The most critical part of the entire process happens before a single line of code is written. It's all about planning and setting very, very clear rules. First off, you've got to decide what kind of attack you want to simulate. In a black box test, the ethical hackers start with zero information, just like a real external attacker would. In a white box test, you give them everything: source code, diagrams, the whole shebang. That allows for the most in-depth review possible. And then there's the gray box test, a popular middle ground where the tester might get something like a regular user's login credentials. This is great for simulating what a rogue employee or an attacker who's already inside your network could do.
And that brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most important piece of paper in this whole process: the rules of engagement, or the ROE. This is the contract that lays out all the ground rules. Think of it as the official, legally binding license to hack.
And this is what makes it a controlled business process, not just chaos. The rules of engagement document spells out everything, the exact times testing is allowed, so you don't disrupt your actual customers. It lists which systems are fair game, the in-scope targets, and just as importantly, which ones are strictly off limits. It even has emergency contacts. This protects everyone involved by setting really clear boundaries.
Okay, with the rules all laid out, the test can finally begin. Now the ethical hackers get to work looking at Innovatech systems with the same mindset as a real criminal hacker. Let's follow their trail. You know, the process usually follows three main stages. It starts with reconnaissance, basically doing homework. The hackers gather publicly available info and find something interesting, a development server that was never supposed to be visible to the public. Next up is exploitation. This is where they actually try to break in. And finally, there's post-exploitation, which answers that critical question. Okay, they're in. So what? What's the real damage they can do?
So while they're poking around that development server, an automated scan flags a potential problem on the login page. Now, scanners spit out false alarms all the time. This is where the human expert is absolutely crucial. The ethical hacker has to dig in and manually confirm if this is a real exploitable threat.
And this is what they use. I know, it looks like complete gibberish. But to a database, that little string of characters is a skeleton key. It's a classic attack called SQL injection. When you pop that into a username field, you're essentially telling the database, hey, just ignore the password and let me in because 1 equals 1, which is always true.
And just like that, they're in. No username, no password. The hacker completely bypassed the login and now has access to the entire database on that server. That's the first domino to fall. But here's where we see the true business impact. This is the so what part. Inside that database, they found employee passwords stored in plain text, a huge no-no. They used one of those passwords to jump over to the main company network. From there, they found more weaknesses and became a domain admin, which basically gave them the keys to the entire kingdom. And in the end, they found the crown jewels, a folder full of sensitive customer data. So the active hacking part is over. But honestly, the most valuable part of the whole engagement is what comes next, the report. A good pen test report does way more than just list a bunch of problems. It translates highly technical risks into plain business language.
And a really great report is basically written for two different audiences. You've got the executive summary, which is for the C-suite. It's short, to the point, no jargon. It focuses on business impact. What's the risk to our revenue, to our reputation? Then you have the technical details section. That's for the engineers. It gives them the step-by-step recipe of the hack and the exact instructions they need to fix everything. So here is how that critical finding would look in the report. It clearly names the issue, and then, most importantly, it states the business impact in no uncertain terms. Total customer data leakage. It shows the proof of how they did it, and it gives a crystal clear recommendation on how to fix it. In this case, by using something called parameterized queries, which prevents this type of attack from ever working. And to quantify just how bad this is, the industry uses a standard scoring system. This vulnerability, it got a 10.0, a perfect 10. That is the highest, most critical score a vulnerability can possibly have. It's the cybersecurity equivalent of a 5-alarm fire. Now for Innovotech, getting this report wasn't the end of the road. Not at all. It was actually the beginning. Because the goal isn't just to find problems, it's to fix them and build a stronger, more secure company. You only get value from the test if you actually fix the issues, right? So the process is simple. First, the team gets to work on remediation, tackling the most critical stuff first. Then they bring the pen testers back to retest and make sure the fixes actually worked. And finally, they build this into their annual budget. They turn security from a one-off project into a continuous cycle of improvement. And that is the absolute key takeaway here. A pen test is not a pass or fail exam. It's a strategic health checkup. It's how you get an honest, expert, outside opinion on your security so that you can make smart, informed decisions to protect your business. And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. In a world where threats change every single day, security is never done. It is a constant journey. So the question you should be asking isn't if you're secure, but when was your last real checkup?